My name is Brent Friedman, and as Russ said, I'm doing a lot of work right now in Hollywood. I'm a co-owner of a company called Electric Farm, and Electric Farm is a multi-platform production company, and we specialize in very high-budget, high-end transmedia content. We've done a number of shows for Sony, for NBC, for MTV recently, and what we do, our approach essentially has been to take a look at the opportunities that exist right now in creating content that is not film and not television and not video games. We're trying to create kind of hybrid entertainment. And our approach has been to basically take the idea of transmedia, which you've heard a little bit about before, and what we're going to do here is a little bit of a deeper dive into what that concept really is and how it might apply to some of the stuff that you guys are doing. Our approach has been pretty simple. We look at as transmedia as a dynamic approach to storytelling. And you can break it down into some pretty basic parts. First of all, one of the things that transmedia isn't, and it gets confused a lot, is this idea that you can take content and put it on all these different platforms. And really what that is more cross-media. And that's just repurposing of content for other platforms. And there is certainly a business in that, but that's not what we're talking about here. With transmedia, the whole idea is to take a story, in fact, take a large story verse, think of it three-dimensionally, and fracture it into a bunch of different pieces, what we call our component parts. And then you take those component parts and you tailor them for each platform, whether that be television, whether it be online, whether it be mobile, whether it be a social networking game, whatever it is, however it's going to be represented, it's a part of the story, and it's what we call fractal, which is it represents the whole, but it's unique unto itself. And when you spread the story across all of these platforms, something very interesting happens. You find new ways to engage your audience, and in fact, you find new ways to increase your audience because you're reaching all different niches around the vast kind of ecosystem of consumers. What we've done on the last show is we've kind of pushed the boundaries for what's possible in terms of transmedia storytelling. Valemont is a show that was a production for MTV. It was done in association with Verizon, who sponsored the show. And the couple things you need to know about it is essentially it was a Hogwarts for vampires. It was the idea that there's a fictional university where vampires go to learn how to be vampires. And the story centered around a murder mystery. And the central storytelling device we used for episodes that were about 2 to 3 minutes long was a cell phone. And that's where Verizon came in. The idea is that every cell phone essentially has a person's life in it. And if you were to open up somebody's cell phone, especially someone around 20 years old, you'd find all of their life in a very nonlinear way. You'd be able to learn a lot about them through their text messages, the pictures they took, the music they've downloaded, their voice messages, their emails, everything. And what we did was we said, okay, we're going to use this cell phone as the nexus point for an entire story to unfold. And one character is going to get someone's cell phone, and because that character whose cell phone it was is missing, they're going to use the clues in that cell phone to piece together the mystery of what happened to this other character. What that did was it gave us a central core in terms of how we could present the story, and it gave us an idea that we could spread across all of these different platforms. And it led to essentially a kind of a transmedia plan where we said, okay, what does the audience need to know? If we break the story of Valemont into its component parts, we had our web series, which was, we'll call it the A story. And that was a series of episodes 2 to 3 minutes long, 35 of them. Then we had a whole list of other things, which were the history of this university, which is not critical information to know to enjoy that A story, but it was supplemental information that could be very interesting. So we created an entire fictional website for Valemont University. And we put banner ads all over mtv.com, encouraging people to come and apply for enrollment at Valemont University. And surprisingly, we had thousands of people, actual high school kids, wanting to enroll in Valemont University. And from there, once you got accepted into Valemont University, you got your own kind of virtual Verizon phone, where then you could connect with other students online. And you would start getting text messages from the professors, and you would getting little hints and clues to the murder mystery. Well, what we discovered was that a lot of people were finding Valemont University and had no idea that it was a show. And that led them to kind of piece together the breadcrumb trails that we led back to mtv.com, where they started to see a trailer for the show. And then they realized, oh wait, this is part of a show. Additionally, we had the backstory of the main characters told in little cell phone videos that were only available on Vcast, which is Verizon's premium content channel. What those two functions did is, before the show even launched, it started creating awareness in different channels and driving it back to mtv.com. It was all part of the story, but it wasn't critical to the narrative in the A story. Additionally, we set up a Facebook page where we allowed people to come and participate in what we called the House Rush, where at the university you could, once you were enrolled as a student, actually join up and rush one of the 5 houses. And the Facebook page was a place for people to kind of flaunt which house they were affiliated with and create little subcommittees and little subgroups. It was basically a social networking site. And then we did another thing. We started a daily Twitter feed from some of the main characters. And that created a whole nother kind of interest stream from audience members, because Twitter is in fact its own channel. We had people were finding the show through Twitter. They were finding it through Facebook. They were finding it through Vcast, and they were finding it through this Valemont site. And when they found it, they were coming into it with a piece of the story, but yet the main story was still those episodes. And by doing this, we created a really interesting phenomenon. We had people coming from all sources, finding the story, and when they came to it, they realized that they could then, if they came in through Twitter, they could go to the website and enroll in the college, or they could go back to Facebook. There was such a multifaceted experience for them. It was no longer a show. It started to become one of the things that we've tried to do in all of our shows, which was build a universe worthy of devotion. And a lot of people always say to me after this, what does that mean exactly? It's like, sounds like a cult. It's like, well, actually what it is a pretty simple recipe. When you build a universe worthy of devotion, you're using all of the obvious tools that you have to tell a good story and to make it compelling. And that's a whole nother seminar, in fact. But let's assume that you're able to create a compelling set of characters in a story. What you do by using transmedia is you start to make it a deep experience. There's different layers to it. And really at the top layer of that surface is the A story. And if you just watched those episodes, you'd have a perfectly wonderful time. The story still holds up completely. If you dig a little bit deeper and you go explore the website of the college and you learn about the history of the college, everything starts to resonate a little bit more. If you go and you watch those videos on Vcast and you learn about the backstory of the characters, suddenly the mystery starts to make a little bit more sense. If you engage with the characters on Twitter and hear what they're doing every day, you're even deeper into the experience. And then if you actually join a community that's talking about all of this, you start to become part of that world. And then doing all of that, you start to create that universe worthy of devotion. Additionally, you can make the experience customizable, and that invites more people in, because then they can come in and choose which house they want to be a part of. They can choose which characters they want to follow. They can decide how they want to experience this world you've created. One of the things that does, and the key benefit here, and you're going to see how this can translate into what you guys are doing, is you can use that audience, you can harness that enthusiasm and that devotion to inspire an audience to take action. And one of the ways that we did this was We didn't create a forum or any place for the fans to really aggregate outside of Facebook. We didn't do it on our website for the college because it felt like that would be breaking the fourth wall. So some of the fans started emailing us saying, hey, we want to talk about the show, and Facebook is a lame way to do it. So where can we go to talk about the show? And I said, I don't know. Well, maybe you guys need to come up with your own forum. So a bunch of fans got together, pooled their resources, and came up with an entire site called the Valemont Commons. And they used all of the design resources from the actual Valemont site and put together what became an incredibly robust forum for the show. And how this actually pays off in a larger sense is that MTV was so impressed by what they did that they turned around and said, going forward, we need to buy this. We need to take control of this and integrate it onto our main website for the sequel that we're doing. Furthermore, we as the creators looked at this and said, this is really cool. They've come up with this fictional overlay that the Commons is the school lounge where people can go talk in character as students at Valemont. That's on campus, and then there's an off-campus section of the site where they can go in and talk about the show. And we thought, this is just so clever and cool. When we do the sequel, we're going to create a part of the show called Valemont Commons. So as we're writing this now, we've actually written in a whole lounge for the student section called Valemont Commons. And we're going to create essentially an integrated video screen where we're going to have a video bulletin board with people saying looking for rooms and houses. And we're going to actually allow some students that are some of our fans for faces to appear in the show itself. So it's going to be this kind of revolving door between the fan site and the show. And that would never have happened if we hadn't inspired these fans to actually take action and build this site. So it's just kind of a nice benefit of really giving the fans something that allowed them to immerse themselves in this world. So if you haven't been asking the question yet, I'm sure it's about ready to come up. And the main thing here is that it's really, at the end of the day, it's all about making money. I mean, I want to say it isn't, and on some level, it really, the truth is, everyone wants to do what they love, but if you do what you love well, then you're going to make money. And right now, the trick is that the business landscape for the entire media spectrum is shifting. I mean, it's not shifting, it's going through a major apocalyptic change. And about 5 years ago, I was in a place where I had worked for 15, 20 years in Hollywood, in the film and television. And a lot of people were starting to see the warning signs that the business was changing. They didn't have the money to, ad revenues were going down. Video was not making the money that it used to. Things were being done cheaper on the web. Everyone was panicking. Now, you can either see the obstacles of what's ahead of you, or you can see the opportunities. And sitting kind of in Hollywood, looking at it from a mainstream point of view, everyone was seeing the obstacles. I decided to step outside of the mainstream and see the opportunities. And by doing that, I gave up my overall deals at Disney and Sony and went from being an employee to an entrepreneur. And it's a scary step, but I think one of the things that it does is it empowers you, and all of the technology and the tools that we have now to tell these incredible stories, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, is essentially an empowering platform for us as an individual or with a team. I think one of the things that you can start doing right now as a journalist is saying, how can I find an issue that's worthy of devotion? How can I find a nonfiction story that's worthy of devotion? And if you can do that, you can start to inspire an audience to not just take action, but to take social action. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think that is one of the keys to not just doing something meaningful, but actually being able to monetize. If you take a look at one of the big stories, probably the biggest story out right now, this oil spill in the Gulf. And it's really kind of the thing that everyone's talking about. I mean, this literally was ripped from the headlines of CNN and .com today. So it happened, I don't know, a month ago, whatever it was. It happened a while ago. But it's still keeping our attention. So when you look at a story like that, and you say, you know, how do you apply the transmedia approach to a story like that? You go back to the same thing we do, which is, you know, how do you fracture that narrative? For us, in Valemont, it was, well, what does the audience need to know? They need to know the main story, and then everything else was kind of superfluous or let's say ancillary, but it augmented the experience. In this, you can say, with something like the Gulf spill, which is a huge story, you can barely wrap your brain around it, you say, well, how are the lives of the audience impacted? So I started doing an exercise, and I am not a journalist, let me qualify this, but I started doing an exercise of, well, what component parts would I break this story down into? So I came up with just some main ones here, which were the environment. Just looking at the Gulf spill from an environmental standpoint is a whole world and a story unto itself. Looking at it from an economical standpoint, just both locally from that region to nationally and internationally, is a whole story unto itself. From a health standpoint, to the people that are on the shores, how are they dealing with it? That's a story. The government, how did this happen? What regulations led to this? What is going to be done to stop it from happening in the future? That's a whole story unto itself. And I'm sure amongst you, you can come up with all sorts of others. The point being is that if I'm a journalist and I look at this and I'm thinking transmedia, I say, oh my God, this is a huge story. Now, I can look at it holistically and say, I'm going to just talk about everything and how important it is, or I can start breaking it down into its component parts and say, you know what, I'm going to do a story about the Gulf, but I'm going to have extractable elements that can pull from the story with multimedia that just deal with the environmental impacts, that just deal with the economy, that just deal with the health. All of those things can be put together to form the whole that I've created, but each one of those things becomes a unique asset that can be kind of ultimately deployed in its own market. So how does this approach help build an audience? Well, I like to think of concentric circles. And if you take your basic idea, your basic story, and you drop it in, it creates a ripple effect of interest. And those ripples kind of diminish. But the ripples can actually get larger with transmedia because you're not waiting for that first stone in the pool to do its work. You're throwing multiple stones in the pool. So all of those ripple effects create concentric circles that are interacting with one another and that are all interconnected. One of the things that you're doing with that is you're creating your own, and I don't know if this is a word, but I like it, virality. If it's not, I've just coined it. But the thing is, you know, you always hear this buzzword of, you know, oh, just make something go viral. It's like, well, viral by its very nature is something you can't control. But in this way, you can almost control it. And that is to say, when you design a story that is essentially modular with these component parts, but everything is integrated and interconnected through hyperlinks and redirects, then what you're doing is you're putting all of these pieces out strategically into audiences that are predisposed to be interested in them. So the Gulf story, that's everyone's interested to some degree in it. But the economic effects of that could have its own particular audience in financial newspapers and blogs and whatnot. The health effects, the environmental effects, the government effects, all of those, you can take pieces of your story and break them off because you've designed it that way. And that is kind of the key, is rather than trying to do this in a retrofit fashion, if you do it from the beginning, everything is organic. For us, and I think it's very possible going forward here, if everything directs you back to your central story, to what I call your hub, and that could be either your own news page, your site, your blog, whatever it is, the hub then becomes the center of the community and the conversation that revolves around that. And when you allow people to contribute to that main page, that main site, the hub, through their own experiences, whether it's pictures, videos, testimonials, then you keep the content is constantly fresh. and you're creating a persistent universe that never goes away. When you have a swirl like that online and you're creating a constant conversation, one of the things that does is you're aggregating a very activated and, in this case, socially conscious audience. So how does all of this turn into money? Well, our company has done a lot of business with some of these brands that you've seen up here. And you know, you can look at the obvious ways to make money, which is you can sell your story or your content, you can license it, you can do ad revenue, but most likely, depending on who you are, unless you're really highly established, that's not going to be something that you can make a living off of. The next step up, the next big kind of option here is when you do the kind of modular monetization model, one of the things that you're going to find is in some cases the parts are worth more than the whole. And what I mean by that is that the licensing model for saying I'm going to take this piece of the story and I'm going to license it or to this network. I'm going to do it over here. I'm going to post it over here. I'm going to create ad. Rather than just having one central place where you're hoping everyone will come and experience your entire story, it's the old putting your eggs in one basket. It could work, but it's not the best way to go forth. When you have an audience and a conversation that's very activated around an important topic, you create an opportunity for brand sponsorship. All these brands that we've worked with came to us because they wanted to be part of the experience we were providing. They didn't want it to say Cisco Presents. They didn't want necessarily product placement, although in some cases some of them actually got it. What they wanted was to be affiliated and associated and thought well of by the audience that was congregating around our content. Additionally, we've talked to a lot of these companies who have said, hey, are you doing anything in the nonfiction world? Why? Because they all have cause marketing budgets. And that's not traditional advertising, but it's money to allow them to be associated with important things and up the perception of their social activism. It's the equivalent of finding grant money out there. Some of these big companies definitely are looking for things like that. The idea here that your audience has a real value, if you can get people to have an important conversation, you then have the opportunity to go to some of these brands, to contact them, to show you what you've done, and actually have them sponsor your story, your content, your site, whatever it is. There are those opportunities that exist. If you want to do it in reverse, I think that there's going to be a real opportunity going forward for branded journalism, where someone who's proven that they can tell really important stories can go and get the sponsorship up front. And that, again, is something that, depending on your, how you view it as something that you're going to be selling out, or as something that enables you to go tell the important stories that the world needs to hear, that's a personal decision. So when you hear all of this, some people get a little overwhelmed thinking, well, that's too much to think about. I just want to go tell a story. I don't have the time or the energy to think about it in this big way and deploy all of these different things and try and create social conversations around my content. The thing is that with these big changes that are coming through, there's actually, I think, a lot of hope. Electric Farm, when we started our company, we did something that everyone told us couldn't be done. They said there is no money in online video. There is no way to make money off of multi-platform content, not when you're spending $3 million to produce it. Well, we not only made back our $3 million, but we made a couple more on top of it. And we started a business model that actually made sense because we were delivering premium content. And we were doing something somewhat unique, which is we were geo-blocking it so that it could only be seen in the US and then selling it discreetly into territories all around the world, which is a lot of work, but it goes back to the parts are more valuable than the whole. Rather than just putting it online for everyone, we were able to market it in each territory individually, and that created much greater revenue streams in the aggregate. So we became a leader through using the transmedia approach. Now we're considered one of the premier producers in this market, and people are coming to us asking us to create stories. after 3 or 4 years ago, them telling us there's no business here. Think about how many people are out there trying to do some version of this. The internet is a huge, big social network, and there is an incredible ability to find partners. I mean, a lot of the stuff we've done when we did it Afterworld, our first show, we literally were working with animators all around the world that we found online. We could not do it ourselves. We went out, we reached out through social networking channels and friends and references and whatnot, and started working globally. There's an incredible opportunity, I think, to form collectives, of whether it's a journalist and a photographer, a videographer, whatever. You don't have to live in the same countries. You can all just have the same interests and the same point of view, and you can find a way to build those collectives online. As Russ used to say, or likes to say, and I've heard him say several times, try and become a definitive resource. And you think about if you had built a big holistic kind of Gulf oil spill story that had all of these elements that were spread out all over the place and was driving people back to a central hub. Imagine if you were the definitive resource. I wouldn't have gone to CNN.com to look for the latest on that. I would have gone to your site. I would have found it through different channels, and I would be there involved in a conversation. There is no conversation at CNN.com. There's comments, but there's nothing active going on. There's no one doing anything there to help change the circumstance. So think about how you can not just tell a story, but create an issue, a story worthy of devotion to bring people in and let people talk about it. One of the things that always happens is, people say, well, where do you think all this is going? And I think really just the simple idea here is that we're going to go from big silos of entertainment and of news and everything else down to, in the case of this boot camp, what I see as like micro news networks. I think you're going to have tons of little networks that are all available online through mobile, and it's going to be in some cases one person. It's going to be Brian Storm. It's going to be, you, and it's going to be little collectives, and they are going to be the ones who are trusted and reliable, who are telling the authentic stories, who are completely transparent, who have conversations swirling around them, and who big important brands and eventually media players are going to come to and allow them and subsidize them to get those stories out. That's where I see it's going. I think it's probably a scary time, but in the case of Charlie Brown, you just got to keep trying to kick at that football and know that one day you're going to actually make contact. That's all.